Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everybody. My name is Sarah Moriarty. I'm Executive Director of Charleston Literary Festival, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here this morning. I want to say thank you to all of you for joining us. And before we get into any sort of formal introductions, I want to ask you, do you have a mobile phone? And if you do, please switch it off. I'll give you 1 second to do that. So, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today to celebrate our inaugural Charleston Literary Festival Cato Fellows who are joining us. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this fellowship. So thanks to the generosity of our sponsor, Marion Cato, who's here with us this morning. Marion Cato. We are so proud to bring 2 inaugural fellows to Charleston Literary Festival this year in memory and in honour of Mr. Wayland H. Cato Jr., who had a lifelong passion for reading and learning. At the age of 100, he continued his daily discipline of devouring books and newspapers stacked high by his chair. Together, the Catos came to believe that the world would be a better place if exceptional young writers were nurtured and encouraged. And this is a sentiment shared by all of us at Charleston Literary Festival. And that's how our fellowship was born. So the fellowship itself offers 2 emerging writers from North Carolina or South Carolina an award of $7,500, a 10-day residency in Charleston for the festival, the opportunity to attend all of the festival sessions and meet with the authors. And so it's an absolute pleasure to introduce all of you to our inaugural fellows who are going to present their work to all of us this morning. And they will also be in conversation after the reading with Dr. Tamara Butler, Executive Director of the Avery Research Centre. Dr. Butler is a long-time festival supporter and interlocutor, so Dr. Butler, it's a wonderful honour to have you back with us here today as well. Dr. Butler. Before I get to really formal introductions, I just want to say what a joy it is to have Latria and Dasia together here with us at the festival. So, as observed at the one of the poetry sessions earlier in the week, we spoke about the importance of looking to our writers and our poets to help us to find our way in the world. We look to our writers and our poets to help us find some direction. And I have to say, having Latria and Dasia here with us for the festival has been emboldening and exciting and crucial. So having these powerful authorial voices from North and South Carolina present alongside us as we build and grow and sort of roll around in all of the ideas that we have, it's been amazing. So I just want to say thank you to Latria and Dasia for being with us and for sharing with us. Thank you. Latria Graham, on the left, is a magazine feature writer from Spartanburg, South Carolina. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, LA Times, The Guardian, espnW, Southern Living, and The Atlantic. Latria is the ethical travel columnist for Afar Magazine, as well as the writer behind Garden and Gun's This Land column, which uses time, place, and memory to document and investigate the lesser-known or rapidly disappearing aspects of the natural world in the South. She's a graduate of Dartmouth College and later earned her MFA in creative nonfiction from the New School in New York City. An assistant professor of creative writing in Augusta University's English and World Languages Department, she is also an instructor in the University of Georgia's Narrative Nonfiction MFA program, housed in the Grady College of Mass Communication and Journalism. Latria Graham, everybody. And that brings me to Dasia Moore. Dasia is a poet and journalist raised in her family homes of Charleston, South Carolina, and Reidsville, North Carolina. Her writing has appeared or is forthcoming in publications including The Offing, Fence, Hayden's Ferry Review, and the Boston Globe, where she was a reporter and magazine staff writer. Dasia's poem, In the America of My Mother's Kitchen, published in Stanchion, was nominated for a 2021 Pushcart Prize. Dasia holds her MFA in creative writing from New York University, where she was a Lillian Vernon Fellow, and a BA from Yale University. In addition to the Cato Fellowship, she's received support from the Purpulous Collective and Rutgers University's Poets and Writers Conference. Dasia now lives, writes, and teaches in Durham, North Carolina. To begin now, this event this afternoon, I would like to invite Dasia to come up and read her work. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dasia Moore.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you to all of the supporters of the Literary Festival. I'm going to start with a short poem titled As It Is Taken From You, I Renew You, or a second sonnet 15. As you learned it by its trees, as you learned it before your name, picture with me palmetto, say blush pink magnolia, own Charleston as if you still own your father's home, and dressed in the brave states of memory, say live oak, say holy city, speak mine to indigo waters, buy back what's yours, blood-bought, shivering gold, hold on to the perfect but a moment. Land is a loss we already know. It means so much for me to be reading and reading these poems here in Charleston. I wanted to thank my granddad, who is in attendance today, the Reverend Fred Henderson Moore, Esquire. Granddad gave our family a home in Charleston for several decades and 3 generations, and I will always be grateful for that. I'm also grateful to my Aunt Corinne and my Uncle Mark, who are here with my granddad down from Rock Hill, and my cousin Vanessa. This is a longer poem called Official City Guide. No city is love. Even at home, I hated how the river held everything rank and rotten. My father's childhood, full of runoff from the rice plantation. My reflection, changing shape, queer and finding refusal, thirst in every brackish water I drank. The last breakfast I remember in Charleston, before all of us moved away, Rosa folding sausage grease into rice, mix and peppers, green and red, I watching with growing hunger. Away, Cincinnati, Atlanta, Reidsville, Charlotte, Norfolk, Tuscaloosa, Rock Hill, New York City, and even North Charleston, and even Somerville, 40 minutes away from the streets our grandparents taught us. Hicks Moore begot, Margaret Drayton begot, John Moore begot 4 sons with Rosa Lee Milton, for whom several granddaughters would be named. From Rosa Lee, granddad. From granddad, my father. Generations born under a white eye fixed on what if the Negroes revolted. When her youngest son was expelled, standing up for his people, Rosa Lee was egregiously proud. Our city still exists on certain streets, takes refuge just north of the limits, is stashed on the Country Extension Road in James Island, where Granddad took me to visit cousin Ursel, 106 years old. After generations as majority Black, Charleston Peninsula is 80% white. Egregiously proud. Granddad, 90, set to spend his life away, keeps repeating to me on the phone. And what part of me was pride, I wonder? Dwindling city, storms, the selves I might have held hotter if not sent away from myself. So you come from away? White accent asks me, hotel where I dreamed of sleeping as a child. I check myself in, a guest from New York. The rage inside me comes from here. Carriage house, where Rosa Lee was born, perhaps among the horses. Cobblestone, ironwork, magnolia, shit. What did her mother smell? Charleston Peninsula, bound by water on 3 sides, 100 people per day moving in. No one's fault. Hot market, small city, so much that must be preserved. Carriage house, now a tea room, where I take Granddad, who cannot climb the stairs. You've made a mistake, the concierge says. No one was born here, not even the slaves. What beauty, born to love up against the ugly past tense of what my fathers knew. Everything rising on Spring Street, a bed and breakfast, once my father's office, the Black business district, historic. Egregious longing, salt sharp place the waters brought me. Fury and pride, these mornings I try not to love. We leave and might survive. Thank you. We're going to leave Charleston for a little bit. This poem starts with an epigraph by the poet Morgan Parker, who asks, "What kinds of bodies are movable and feasts?" Eating good in New Orleans. I seen the meat fall off the bone. I took my teeth and made it come. How easy, killing dead a living thing. Red wine, reduction, voiceless duck, radish, baby green, drop of citrus, maybe, to cut the sweet. Here it is. I ate good in New Orleans. I stayed in a big new house with rooftop views. The Superdome sat bloated on the skyline. The ghosts sat on their rooftops too. I cried while I was eating. Brown sugar, butter, banana flambe, brown roux gumbo, gator nugget, wild rice dressing tasting like home, rum sweet hibiscus, black and lime, fat from the duck, sinew stuck somewhere in my mouth where no one could see. My stomach hurt. A whole row of tourist houses, a whole nother being built. From the top of mine, I feasted my eyes. The sun rose. I seen the city skin blackened to my taste. I left one bite on my plate to appreciate what I had devoured. How easy, juicy, thick. The first time I ate for real was in my cousin's kitchen, a different old city. Don't none of us live there now. And then staying away for a little bit, then this next poem is from a longer series of poems called St. Anne Parish, which is in Jamaica, after the Caribbean. Day 3. It is not the rainy season, but still it rains every day. Eve and I visit a farm where we duck under trees and 10 roofs and vining roses, half in and half out of spotting storms. Each time the sky clears, the sun shines hot. The ground is thirsty. Puddles disappear. Eve teaches me to chew cane like she did as a child in the DR. We are drunk on sugar water spit and the sound of rain. We translate names for home, search for seeds that planted us on this side of a rising ocean. We watched the earth even as we changed it, watched the water drink the islands, watched the sky summon, the seas churn. I do not want to name this movement, my excursion into another word for home. Down south, I offer to Eve and our guide, a Jamaican man raised in these mountains. Down south, the old folks say a sun shower means the devil is beating his wife. The man pauses, looks at the sky. That's what we call it here too. And this last poem is a short one for my cousins. New etymologies for freedom. It is never just theory. The Atlantic divided me in two. A spirit me watched over me, let my troubles linger in her water. Girlhood is a call. My cousins walked us to the park, the asphalt sizzled, the sidewalk called to bodied parts of them I could not name. They didn't answer. What does free taste like to a hot little thing? An iciness, a paper cup, a dyed red, dyed blue. That summer, like many summers, I tried to learn to swim. The fear of floating cut my breath in half. I always gave in to the water. Thank you so much. Thank you. And I am so honored to pass the mic to Latria Graham.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. I love Charleston. I'm glad to be back. I write a lot about Charleston as the descendant of Gullah Geechee peoples that then moved into the interior. I'm from Spartanburg, South Carolina, and my dad grew up in Newberry County. So I tried to think about what I could read today. And I thought about doing something sentimental, like taking my mama fishing. But then there was this moment that we've had this week of uncertainty. And even before the election, I sought out nature as refuge. So right before Dasia and I went to the ocean, and I took her to a section of Beaufort, South Carolina, that gets reshaped about every 5 years because of hurricanes, right? And sort of this solace in change. So I went back into the archive, and as Sarah mentioned, I write the This Land column for Garden and Gun. And so I wondered what I could say that spoke to the uncertainty, but also spoke to the beauty that I think is sort of at the core of what I try to do for readers. So this piece is about seeking solace in the darkness, and it's called Lights in the Valley, and it's from Garden and Gun's This Land. I do not remember being afraid of the dark as a child. My father made the night sky seem like a grand adventure with his stories, remnants from his college science classes mixed with lore he picked up from what was then called the Sci-Fi Channel. On evenings when Dad wasn't working the graveyard shift at the gas station, my little brother Nicholas and I would grab blankets and snacks and beg him to take us outside. We would pile into his gold pickup, drive into a clearing in the Blue Ridge foothills in upstate South Carolina, and stargaze from the bed of the truck. If we remembered, somebody would grab the binoculars my father used at NASCAR races and tilt them to the sky, searching for the planets we could identify. Sometimes we found Venus or Jupiter. We would giggle as he told us tales of heroes and dragons, the 12 labors of Hercules, the plight of Andromeda. Dad saw the celestial map as a book of stories, a choreographed dance of heavenly bodies above our heads. Each yarn was a meditation on creation and destruction and how the light and darkness needed each other to function. The stars made us capable of travel in our minds, but also over land, across seas, or if you were enslaved as my ancestors were, perhaps towards freedom. When we were children, looking at them gave us a way to calibrate our expectations about our place in the world. We came to understand that the stories told to us, which we would later relay to others, offered a way to make sense of what we were unable to fathom. When we were old enough to go by ourselves, my brother and I began braving midwinter temperatures to sit on top of Dad's truck and talk while the vehicle was parked in the yard. Siblings wondering what we would become when we grew up. We tried to grasp the science we were taught in school, talk of light years and infinity. The cosmos made us feel small, interlopers in a situation over which we had little control. At 9 and 12, we had no way of sorting out the true meaning of time, other than recognizing that one day we would run out of it. Some evenings, we didn't say anything. The night has changed since then. I can no longer see the wonders of our galaxy from my front yard, a predicament that leads me to the Bayer Dark Sky Observatory in Burnsville, North Carolina, the first certified International Dark Sky Association park in the Southeast. On the edge of Yancey County stands one of the last remaining dark patches of sky east of the Mississippi. For thousands of years, when night fell, humans found a way to adapt to it. Now we shape the world to suit our needs, illuminating the dark with artificial light. But these constantly lit nights, along with the spike in land development across the South, have created light pollution, blocking our ability to appreciate the miracle of lush, deep, inky nights in heavens where the moon and stars guide us to who we are and where we're going. Almost 2 decades after those talks on the truck, I'm searching for that tapestry of stars again, the kind of velvety night that retreated farther into the forest with the advent of suburban sprawl and street lamps that came with it. The bare, dark sky observatory lies far enough from any city that a clear night brings a stunning display. With the naked eye, we can see 9,000 stars. With the observatory's telescope, the largest one in the region dedicated to public use, the number jumps to 700 million. After walking around the property, deep in old-growth forest, I watched the sun set over the meadow at the base of the observatory. The land here was not always so beautiful. A major mica mining operation once flourished in that meadow. A variety of goods use the flaky material, from things like insulators and electronic equipment to makeup to create that shimmer effect. This region has long provided much of the country's supply. When the mine closed, it left a large gash in the ground, which the municipality turned into the county dump. Eventually, when the landfill was capped, an artist cooperative claimed the space. Intent on creating something beneficial from the waste, they named their cooperative Energy Exchange and used the methane the landfill emitted to power artist studios, heat electric ceramic kilns, and support agricultural greenhouses. When the methane ran out, the organization dissolved. Mayland Community College took over the property and renamed it Mayland Earth to Sky Park. Nestled in the Blue Ridge, the area is known for a good view of the stars. And in 2014, several studies of the night sky confirmed it. Mayland earned its official nod from the International Dark Sky Association and later opened the observatory. Now, several weekends a month, the cosmic curious and astronomy enthusiasts find their way to Pisgah National Forest to find this place for its unobstructed views of the heavens. Up at that observatory, 2,736 feet above sea level, we watch the stars come out one by one. Vega first, then later others, like Polaris, then all of a sudden, all at once. Our guides for the night, Jeremy Bear and Steve Brutton, call themselves the Milky Way Cowboys. Bear and a volunteer calibrate the observatory's 2 outdoor telescopes to focus on nebula clusters, while Bruton points out constellations. "Keep looking up," Bruton shouts from time to time, between asking the audience trivia questions about astronomy and passing out fun-sized Milky Way bars as prizes. Above, the moon is just a sliver, less than 8% full. The night is clear and cold, and our little cluster of stargazers do what Bruton says, searching for some answers, searching for something, perhaps wondering how to make sense of what we are all living through. Amid what we hope will be the twilight of the pandemic, we have made our way to this mountain, asking the night sky to tell us what to make of mysteries, wondering what we will discover in the absence of light. How, as with this park, to build something beautiful out of what was once ugliness. A reminder of who we have the capacity to be. An alarm on Bear's phone goes off, alerting us to the fact that the International Space Station is passing right above our heads, and we crane our necks skyward, watching the flash of light as it speeds through the night. The 6-person crew on board hail from different countries, but they've come together to test their endurance in an environment hostile to life. And we humans navigate our way into new territory and plan the future mission to Mars. Those of us still earthbound marvel at it all. The balls of gas thousands of light years away, the occasional meteor that winks in the periphery, the humans living above us, at least for a little while. When I decide to leave, it is almost midnight. My eyes have adjusted to the Stygian surroundings, making it easier to get my bearings. I step outside the observatory, and the ground around me is glittering. It's mica. Not enough to be worth mining, maybe, but just enough to dazzle. White azaleas and irises light my path. They're planted specifically to reflect the moonlight and starshine, and they seem to float and glow in the dark. So much has changed since my childhood communions with the night. My family is smaller, my worries greater. The compass I once used to negotiate my way day to day doesn't track the same anymore. After a discombobulating year that took so much from so many, there's a pressure to create my own light. Some sleepless nights, I am not sure of how the world works. There's little thought of the emotion or the environmental costs of it all. When the light burns out, I'm left fumbling, searching for something to sustain me during life's pitch black moments. But here, among the stars, I feel a flicker of hope. The uncertainty that seemed overwhelming has retreated to the back of my mind. And that is worth fighting for, to preserve these strongholds of darkness and myself. Perhaps, if nothing else, I can reflect a little of that light on another so that they may feel it too. Thank you.
Welcome back. I don't know. How y'all doing? Good. All right. I want to give them another round of applause. It's a lot. It's a lot that goes into the work, and so I hope everybody took a deep breath. Hope some people closed their eyes and felt all of the pieces that were shared. So I want to start in one place about craft. Because I think it's really important as we think about the fact that you're writers. And every time we get on the stage, people want to talk about the book and the plots and the whatever. But I was like, what is it like? Tell us a little bit about your craft and what we should know when it comes to writers and their craft, especially from your perspective.
Do you want to go first? Sure.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think for me, a lot of craft is rooted in centering myself and why I do the work. So being surrounded by my family photos, by quotes and lines from different writers who I love, and so having those present. A lot of the craft is also just writing a lot of not so great things and knowing when to throw them away and when to save them and revive them. But I think that all of it comes down to practice, right? Whenever I teach writing, I always define craft for my students as the whole series of decisions that a writer makes, any decision. And so going slowly enough and being attentive enough in order to understand those decisions myself as I'm making them and also revisit them is really how I think about it.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, I would not have defined it that way, but I totally agree with you. But in thinking about craft, I often feel like I'm trying to hold time in some ways, like the past and the way we've engaged with things. I'm also trying to hold the future, right? And that's a rough one to try to meet and find myself sort of in the middle. So what has been said, what needs saying, or what would bring comfort sort of, I think, to those coming after me or folks that would read it, and thinking about how that's been done in the past, right? And how I can be in conversation with that. So, right, even for this piece that I read today, referencing these Greek mythology stories and things like that, and sort of holding them together. But I do think craft, 50% of craft, I think, is like the discipline and respect to put the hiney in the chair. Right? And to like sit with words, to sit with this act of creating. Because I think people often think, oh, you get inspired and you sit down. I was like, no, every day we sort of sit down and think about what we can bring, what we know, what we don't know, and being willing to ask questions, right? I often say, like craft is learning all of those skills and techniques, and then my own spin on it is bringing a curiosity or a guiding question to it. But great reference for craft. I'm terrible at structure and terrible at brevity, which I honor poets for. So I'm always learning. Like every morning I start with a poem, right? And that's my way of thinking about how y'all talk about imagery, how you fit a message into sort of this very tight envelope.
When you said that, it automatically made me think of, can y'all hear me? Okay. I was like, I can't. There we go.
Okay.
We got like a mic. There, hello. Trying to get the mic situation. We got to hear mic conundrum. And so one of the questions that I have is actually about who are you writing with? So you said that you have people who inspire you. You said every day you start with a poem. So who are some of the artists and writers, poets that you're leaning on or looking to at some point?
Yeah, okay, I'll start with this one. Leaning really heavily on Nikki Finney, right? So if you know her, she won the National Book Award for Head Off and Split from South Carolina, currently a professor at the University of South Carolina. So her book, Rice, is always there, and I even said this in my application, because she's holding, you know, the entire Anthropocene, right? All of thinking about human history and impact on landscape, but also her family. So in conversation really heavily with her. Right now I'm reading Willie Kennard III's Order of Service, another poet. But I'm also in conversation, I think, we'll see, because they may not sign off on this, with like Dr. Taya Miles and all that she carried, the way that she's opening up those spaces in the archive, right? And exploring what was often seen as silence, right? And pushing and pull. I also love when I don't agree with folks and I sort of am able to write against them, right? In some ways, it clarifies what I really think. In some ways, we will leave it. So Ta-Nehisi Coates is one. I know. I was like, I probably shouldn't name drop too hard in terms of that. You never want to make a list of your enemies. You might need them to review your book. But one of those, like, he came to South Carolina. It's a short piece in his new book, and I was like, there's so much that you missed. Let me tell you all the things that you missed. Let me tell you what it's like to be a child going to the governor's school at South Carolina that performs on the steps of the Capitol every year between a statue of J. Marion Sims, the white scientist who experimented on enslaved Black women, and the Confederate flag that flies above the Capitol. He can never capture that experience, so that's my job. So but it makes me, sometimes I'll read something, I'm like, you don't have that right, and I'm like, let me tell you everything you missed or the things that you don't know. So I'm grateful for folks like that. So even when I read something, I may not like it, but it tells me who I don't want to be. That's just as important. So I'll stop now.
I love that.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's important to read widely, and sometimes we read things that we want to duplicate or be in conversation with, and sometimes not. I would say that Lucille Clifton is one of my all-time inspirations, and if there's something short that I need just to bring me into the space of writing, then I usually turn to her. I also think a lot about visual art. There's this artist, Kalita Rawls,
Yes.
who paints these beautiful and massive portraits of Black people like swimming or just like floating in water. And they're so beautiful and so rich. And I write a lot about water. So I think about that a lot. And then I have writers that I turn to kind of for sharpening my vision and sense of the world less than for poetic craft. So there are brilliant academics like Christina Sharp, who writes about living in the wake of slavery. Then there's Dionne Brand, who's a great thinker and also a poet, born in Trinidad and Tobago, spent most of her adult life in Canada. So looking to people like that who are also helping us see the world with clarity. And I have to thank one of my great teachers and mentors, Claudia Rankin, because I've taken classes with her in undergrad and grad school, and there's so many, especially experimental and radical Black women writers that I first encountered in her classrooms.
I love that. I feel like we've lived similar lives. Like, I think we have a very similar bookshelf up here. And so one of the questions that comes up for me as both of you were talking was looking at, so thinking about your training. So the way that you intentionally kind of pulled in certain writers, Black women in particular. Why? What did your MFA trainings look like? What did those experiences look like? And how does that shape you as a teacher of the craft?
Yeah. I was going to say my experience is very fresh, so I'm still figuring out how to think of it as a whole. But I mean, Latria and I have spent a lot of this week talking about this. That the few years between us, so there's so much that has changed, so much in. There's so much that hasn't too, but I was really fortunate to have someone like Claudia Rankin as my thesis advisor, and so some of the conversations that come up in an MFA sometimes about things like choosing between craft and content, which is a false binary. I didn't have to encounter those questions in her classes. I think for me, I didn't study English in college. I've written since I was very young, but I majored in ethics, politics, and economics. So when you're talking about people you write against, I think about Hegel way more than I want to, and it's like the master-slave dialectic, and I'm like, no. So writing against that. But for me, it was a lot of being immersed in reading. So learning how to read poetry as part of my craft, and also that discipline, the going to the page every day, returning to poems, and even before my MFA, because in poetry, there's sometimes a sense that, it's spiritual, it's creative, and so like either the poem comes out the way it's supposed to be or it doesn't. It's easy to feel that way. But it was actually working as a journalist that helped me understand revision as part of the process. And then my MFA helped teach me how to do that with poems, and also put me in conversation with some people who were thinking about the same things.
There were major differences, I guess, between our MFAs. So to give you some idea, our program had over 100 students in it, but we didn't have any Black nonfiction, like any actually nonfiction instructors of color. And it was one of those things, and they were all from New York. And, I chose to go to New York. This is one of those things, learn whether or not this place is really meant for you. But once I realized it wasn't meant for me, I'm hard-headed and I hung in there. But, there was a time where everybody's like, your stories are too circular, too Southern. Like, we have a very oral way of telling stories and pulling things in and digressions, and they wanted it to fit in this very flashy, sexy New York City, box, and that wasn't me. And so I really had to learn to defend my point of view. But it also taught me something about patience. I made a joke that like it's only taken 10 years for New York to catch up with us, right? The fact that like some of these writers, we're sort of the biggest thing going right now, and we've always had a point of view and something to say, but now people are really listening to us in an interesting way and saying, oh, these guys really know something about that. Yes, we do. We've had hundreds of years to practice, sort of in that way, but. And sort of thinking about, I'm trying to make sure that I don't go too far off of the question, but like seeing the way that your MFA worked gave me a lot of hope, and that's the type of teacher I try to be. I'm bringing in, because I also teach people from everywhere. I'm like, have you seen this? What's challenging you? What's frustrating you? What are you curious about? I'm writing what's keeping me up at night, right? But then I'm thinking about how can I use my critical thinking skills, right? Which we both went to boarding school. We've had very parallel lives, but like 10 years apart. And so sometimes that like academic inquiry, critical thinking, right, and applying it to rigor, to structure, to form. My MFA taught me how to write a beautiful sentence, but it didn't teach me how to be an artist in the world in some ways. So I've spent a lot of time sort of dismantling what I was taught and reshaping it in my own image, right? And so I have a lot of these we have a lot of the same people on our bookshelves, but I had to find them. Yeah. I had to kind of go to different different bookstores and things, but also being in community, meeting more people, saying, hey, what are you reading? And adding that to the list and sort of learning that way. It's been a little bit more by osmosis. But like boarding school, I was a clarinetist at the Governor's School, taught me how to sit in a room with myself for extended amounts of time, right, and practice and do the same, scale over and over again until it's perfect, or things like that. So like being able to sit with your work, also that sound, like musicians are always thinking about sound, the way my rhythm and my sentences work still exists, even though I no longer play my instrument anymore.
Yeah. Ooh. I mean, I have so many other questions, but one, I want to talk about all the things. But one of the things is you said something about the South, and I think it's really beautiful that both of you are Carolina girls, and just what does that mean? How does that show up in your work? What does it mean to put that to the page? The fact that you're publishing also to like wide audiences, not just, us, me. Mm-hmm. So. Yeah. What does that look like to think about writing about the South? Why? I mean, I already know why.
Yeah. I think it's a place, and this also comes out of like, I went to Dartmouth in 2004 and nobody knew where Spartanburg was. They like might know Myrtle Beach, right? Like to a lesser extent, know Charleston. So it felt like a very open place on the map, but like my history is here, my family is here, my stories come out of this place, my endurance and resilience, I think show up in this place. And it's very important to me. I ran away from South Carolina, right? So my dad had a farm in Silver Street, South Carolina. We don't even have a stoplight, right? So, and raised hogs, and I swear I still calculate the price of everything in watermelons because, we were $1,000 or 1,000 watermelon a day operation. So like being on a farm in that way, the minute that I knew I could, I ran away from that life. And went to, I went to Dartmouth because it was the furthest I could get away from South Carolina without crossing the Canadian border because my parents would not let me cross the Mississippi. that was the like parameter that we had. And I left it, I realized how much I loved it and I missed it. And I realized that it's part of me in a way that is it on me or is it in me, right? In some ways I really think about that. Coming back to a place with traditions, rituals, and respect, and a place where the trees know you, right? And you know them too, and you know when the plums are going to come in, and you know when to start looking for poke salad. So leaving gave me that new lens for that, and I think that may be the case for both of us. And then craft gave me a way to talk about it, and a way that often work is about grief, or not quite nostalgia, because that's been weaponized and tweaked. And nostalgia is often like the rosy painting on something, but this was hard, but it was mine, and here's what I have made of it. And so, I think I'm always pushing and pulling. I don't know that I can live anywhere else. I'm spoiled in some ways. I can go other places, but I come back, right? I went to Montana as a professor, and I was like, it's snowing in June. It's time to, I'm still looking at purposes, and I should be looking at irises and other, I was like, it's time to go. I appreciate this, but it really makes me realize, honor and understand what I had, right? What my grandmother had, what my great-great-grandmother had, and it really has put some things in context for me. I think there's a lot of history that doesn't get talked about, that I'm still having to discover. We have a lot of shame and secrets in my family, and so sitting with that, but like the South Carolina, Charleston, for a lot of it, holds a lot of that for me. So in some ways, you ask that question, I'm like, it's everything.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah, this was hard, this was mine, I love that. And that's really the base of it for me. My family moved a lot in my younger years, and but I always had these two homes, Charleston, and then my mom's side of the family is from Rockingham County, North Carolina, which is rural tobacco country. But having those two guideposts and knowing that all four of my grandparents and their parents and their grandparents worked so that I would feel a sense of ownership and place and belonging, it feels like my responsibility to carry that work forward and not leave their legacy behind. Yeah. Now, as Latria already mentioned, kind of or alluded to, like many young Southerners, especially young Black kids and Black women, I think in particular, my sense was that education was somewhere outside of here. So I went to New England for college, and I got a job in New York shortly after graduating. So I was in the Northeast for 10 years. And I love Harlem. Part of what I love about Harlem, though, is that everybody's grandmama is from North or South Carolina. So, and I just moved back to Durham in July. But through all of that time, starting when I was in high school, when I started to more consistently write poetry, I have always written about Charleston, and then also the Carolinas more broadly. And I think the reason that is, besides the personal connection, is that I'm really interested in freedom, in liberation. And I believe that the history shows us that the South, in addition to being one of the most brutal sites of unfreedom, has also been the most prolific laboratory of freedom. Black Southerners have worked so hard, and our allies as well, to build institutions. Public education is a Reconstruction policy. Like to have that history and that roadmap, and to do it in the face of some of the most brutal challenges on earth, I think is really special. And so I don't see poetry or Southern poetry or Southern writing as something that I chose so much as something that's my job to do.
I'm gonna tell you something that's very eerie, and then I'm gonna open up the questions. So when both of you were talking and reading, I realized that Charleston is doing something. You were talking about being a visitor. I remember that in the poem. But your rage is from here. And so something that came up for me is thinking about June Jordan and the fact of like the report from the Bahamas of being a Black woman abroad, but it's like I still feel connected to these women. But in Charleston, I have friends who are like, I come to Charleston and I'm always shocked when I see so many white people, because in my imagination, Charleston is Black, and it always has been. And so now, if you follow the artists, though, in the Low Country, they have the same imagination around freedom. So I'm thinking of Brittany Washington and Joshua Parks, who have the multiple meetings of freedom at the Francis Bidler Forest. Recently at the International African American Museum was Follow the North Star. You have Damon Melicon at the Halsey, which is like As Any Means Necessary. And then there's one more about freedom that's also at Francis Bidler. And so like, if we just look around, we have all of these Black artists that are helping us remember that regardless of what we see, the South is a place of dreaming up of freedom and liberation. So I wanted to say thank you for that. Another thing I just wanted to thank you also for was for the remembrance that we belong here. So both of you in your writing are always trying to remind us, A, that as Black people, we belong here. As Black women, we have the right to write about here. And so I just wanted to say thank you for making that possible in your work. So I want to give y'all a round of applause for that. Because my hope is that one day there'll be somebody sitting on this stage and they'll be asking, who are the writers that influence you? And I hope that they will both say your names, as there are reflections of Black and brown girls and young people who are like, this is who I look to remind me that home is always a site of inquiry and a site of inspiration. So I just want to say thank you. Do we have any questions? We got 10 minutes from the audience. Oh, okay, so we have 2 questions. We got mics on the move somewhere. Not sure where they are. There they go. Give us 1 second. We just got to bring you the microphone. We're going to start. We have 4 questions. We're going to start in the back and work our way forward. Go ahead. Yes.
Well, thank you, Dr. Butler. Latria, Dasia, thank you so much. I guess I have a difficult question to ask. In your thinking, at what point do you code switch from an academic writer to a creative in the public arena where you are able to share more broadly beyond the discipline of writing and actually bringing the spirit to the people? Because poetry, as you have already explained, is a very private experience. You're sitting in your moment, and oftentimes the reader finds themselves going through the same experience as we read your writing. And I just wanted to know, do you have any interest in seeing your poetry live beyond the printed page?
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. I think that poetry has become or is often seen as an academic pursuit, but I learned poetry because it was around me in my everyday life. I learned it from the King James Bible growing up. I learned it from Maya Angelou and Langston Hughes being read within my family. My first ever poetry reading was at a family Easter gathering on my mom's side with like 200 people, all relatives. And my gift was a quilt that my great aunt had made. So to me, poetry is of and for the people and my people. So any collaboration with art or whatever, I would always welcome. To your question about switching for different audiences, it's a difficult one, especially when you have lived in so many different contexts, as both of us have. But I try to do less of that, honestly, every year. I want my conversation to be the same no matter who my audience is, really. Yeah.
And a similar thing, when you first asked that question, I was like, I kind of hope I don't, right? I've gotten to the point where I'm no longer scared. So, actually, let me line. 2 of the smartest people that I knew, one of them being my grandmother, Mary Graham, that wrote about 3rd grade education, right? And so I often, when I write, other than Stygian, I think that's the only word in that reading that I did, I tried to write in a way that my family members could understand it. That they could, when they see themselves in the magazine, right, or I'm talking about my dad or things like that, they can also read and comprehend what I'm saying in that way. So even my long form narrative features, I really do try to keep it at a level where, if somebody's reading it to my grandmother or to my, my dad, both my grandmother and my dad passed, but folks that don't have as much education as we would think. They're not like, what's that mean? Or I've lost interest because I'm unsure, or this feels like it's above me. I never want to be above someone that is interested in me telling a story. So I really try to be, and also the fact that just because it's plain or it's simple doesn't mean it doesn't have academic value. And that's really what I've been playing with in the last couple of years as a professor. And I was like, people often think creative writing, you know, we have what you read every day, and we have literature with a capital L. And I was like, no, we're reading, let's pull some stuff that was printed last week, right? And like, how do we bring that in? And like, what about it is challenging? Let's work through this together and sort of think about it that way. So I hope that I do less code switching, right? Like the conversation that we're having here is very much the conversation we had at our house on 39th Street after brunch one day and stuff like that. I try my best because I spend so much time like boxing up elements of myself that like I found my truest voice when I let my perspective, right, of growing up on a farm, growing up poor, of being abused in a variety of ways, when I like let that meet sort of my observations and the way that I move through the world. So I hope that my physical presence is just as strong as my literary one, my writing one.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, good question.
All right.
Hi there. Thank you very much for your beautiful work. Thank you for sharing it. I've got a question for you, Latria. First of all, Velvet Night, probably the best 2 words I've heard all festival. Fantastic. I just had a question about the stars, the planets. How does your experience as a African American woman inform your interest or your family's interest, your culture's interest in the night sky? I guess you could put those kind of the other way around as well, but yeah.
Good question. It's always given us something to talk about, right? Whenever it's a clear night, and that way we didn't always, and now I'm looking more at West African cosmology and how they tell stories about the night and things like that. But it gave us a way to be together, and that was really, really important. The stars didn't cost anything, right? In some ways, you could go out and spend time like that. But often I write about Black people in the outdoors. I'll keep this brief because I know we've only got a second, but like I wrote this essay called Out There No One Can Hear You Scream. It's about being a Black woman without cell service in some dicey parts of the country. I spend my life that way. I travel by myself most of the time. And if I've got a tattoo on my arm that says, I know you're scared, do it anyway. And that is really just kind of my approach when I go into these places. You know, I've had to knock on the door of someone at NASCAR. They flew a gigantic Confederate flag above their trailer. And like the job of a journalist is to ask the question. And so I knock on the door and ask the question. I'm like, why does this flag mean so much to you that you bring it to this place, right? So I'm never scared. I consider myself protected. I always have my head on a swivel, right? Somebody knows where I am. I keep a GPS. So my family, and this is like in some ways my home. I was driving here, and it was dark and it was foggy, and I was like, wow, if I was not from here, I would consider this really, really creepy. I was like, this is home. So I want to leave word for you.
Oh, no, I think that was just for you. That was great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right here.
First, I want to say that your poetry and your presence this afternoon has been a balm for me in many, many ways. There is a quote probably by several people, but I know Toni Morrison talked about the role of artists in healing civilization. And I'm wondering to what degree, if that resonates for you, and if so, to what degree, how do you think about that and feel that?
Mm-hmm. And before you answer, I want to take this one last question so that we can maybe try to get 2 in at once. We got one right here in the front. Did you still want to ask? Yes. Okay. So we could try to tackle them.
Yeah.
In a.
Thank you.
No problem.
I want to thank both of you. Your poems were simply glorious. The question that I have relates to society as it is today. Mm-hmm. We live in a world of extreme censorship, where a lot of the literary works of many poets, many people who want to write, have been extracted from school systems. My question is, how afraid of you, or does this sometimes dictate how you shape your narratives? And this question is for both of you.
Yeah, I think those questions go together really well. Because I think for me, the source of healing and the healing that I hope my work provides to others. I mean, here I wrote mostly about place and Blackness. I also write about queerness. I'm engaged to another Black woman. And so all of those things. So there's so much beauty in those experiences, and so much of the pain in those experiences comes from stories not being told, right? It's almost a type of being made to feel unreal or unwell, that everything you understand about the world, you don't see reflected back. And so to write that down, to speak it out loud, to hopefully have it recorded somewhere, is pushing back against that. And for our political moment, I don't change what I write, I don't change what I say, but it is a real fear. For me, I'm very early in my career. I would love to teach these Black Southern stories in Black Southern places, but as we all know, our region is at the forefront of removing books from shelves, denying professors tenure, or even firing them if they have tenure. So those are things that I think about, and I just feel fortunate to right now be writing with very few financial responsibilities outside of myself. I don't have children. So I can write what I write and just hope that, the path finds me in terms of career.
Good one. I'll be very quick if that's okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So, even before Tuesday, I teach in Augusta, Georgia. We just had Hurricane Helen, right? Lost 90% of our trees over 1.5 feet in diameter. Something like, and don't quote me on the stats, 1 in 5 homes had a tree in it, right? 1 in 3 cars. So, right, like this idea of devastation and being without power for 2 weeks. And when we went back to school, the first thing I did was put together a DIY care kit for students, right? It's a little paper bag, and it had affirmations and fresh fruit that they may not have seen, because we've been without power and all these things for so long. And I put up a quote that was like, "This is when the artists go to work," and it's a Toni Morrison quote, right? This idea that there's no time for despair. My job I consider myself an artist who teaches, not a teacher interested in art. 2 different things. And so it's not like the minute y'all give me too much paperwork and I become, a teacher who is interested in art, it's not for me. But my job is to help us make sense of what has happened and is happening to us. And to that end, I brought in, we've been through this hurricane. Nikki Finney's Left, which is about Hurricane Katrina, Patricia Smith's Blood Dazzler, which is also about Katrina, and saying this is their experience. How does that match up with your experience? And doing that for all of my students, I've got 25 of them, and we have voice note conversations and feedback about their stuff. It's like, have you seen this queer artist, or this trans editor is doing this? So the day that that becomes in peril for me, that means my job is my job. I just go somewhere else to do my job. And so I don't think that what I do or how I move through the world or what I teach will change. I understand, again, the financial responsibility part of that. I also don't have children, but I've got a mama, auntie, and a Portuguese water dog and cow. So, and she likes fresh fish.
Yep.
So, that idea, but this is stories have saved my life. And it is the only thing that I want to do. And I consider this to be my purpose. So anything that gets in the way of it, I just pray it will move. Because I think the truth is what I'm shackled to.
Yeah.
Right? So, I hope that answers the question.
So before we leave, I want to leave with a piece of a poem. So I also like the writing of Aja Monet. And so she has a poem at the end of her book. My mother was a freedom fighter, that's called Daughters of a New Day. And so I feel like this group is exactly that. And so at the end of her poem, she writes, "We protest to empower personhood more than mourning. We roar, be not discouraged, be not dismayed, be defiant and deliberate, always be." Thank you. Thank y'all so much for being here. Appreciate y'all.
Ladies and gentlemen, join me in just saying thank you one more time. Dr. Tamara Butler, thank you for facilitating that wonderful conversation. And Dasia Moore and Latria Graham, thank you so much. Latria, I can't wait to write to Ta-Nehisi Coates and tell him he has to come to Charleston, because you and him have to have that conversation right here on the stage. I, for one, definitely want to see it. Thank you so much for bringing us on this tour of Charleston and the landscapes and the streets and the environs from your perspective, and bringing it to life in such a vivid, evocative, beautiful way. Thank you for your meditations on freedom, on finding beauty in uncertainty, on endurance, on resilience. I think the last, this audience member who said that this was really a balm for us speaks to how a lot of us are feeling in the room today, listening to your words. So thank you for reflecting a little bit of your light on us today. We deeply, deeply appreciate you being with us. One more time for our fellows, Latria Graham and Dasia Moore. And just two little housekeeping things from me. Well, I'd like to also just one more time thank Mary and Cato in the front, are the sponsor and mind behind this fellowship. We deeply appreciate you, Mary and Cato. And Charleston Literary Festival runs through the end of the day on Sunday. So we have events today, tomorrow, the next day. So come out and see us. Thank you very much.